Hello, my name is Leslie Whitty. I am the Vice President of Outreach and Communication for the South Central Workforce Development Board. And joining me today, we have Dr. Robert Boone. He is our President and CEO, and John Swords, who is the VP of Operations and Special Projects. And we will be exploring our September edition for the Open Jobs Report analysis and review. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah,
I appreciate it very much. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Robert Boone.
Thank you. And thank you to our audience for joining us again this month for our September edition of our Open Jobs Report analysis and review. Many of you know we launched this for the first time last month. Our August edition was our inaugural edition of the Open Jobs Report. And I just wanted to kick us off with a little bit of context as far as how we got here, why we decided to do it, and also a little information about our data sources, because we all know that data is only as good as the source that we're pulling from. So first off, we decided to do this report as a workforce board because we use data daily in our decision-making process, and also throughout our region, because many people reach out to us for data on a regular basis. So we have really good sources of data, and we also use that data to really help influence our strategic plan and helping individuals prepare for work, find work, sustain work, and toward upward mobility. We also help our employer customers with data. So we wanted to open this up to the community, our analysis and our review of data that we have. I will say that we are using a software called Jobs EQ that is nationally recognized among economic development organizations and chambers of commerce for data pulling. And really what it does is it scours the web, think Monster, Career Builder, sites like that. It scours the web and finds job postings. So I want to say here at the very outset of the presentation that although the title of the presentation is Open Jobs Report, really it's a little bit of a misnomer. We are looking at advertised jobs and assuming that those advertised jobs are openings. And that assumption actually is part of the problem that we seek to kind of demystify in this report. Not all open jobs are advertised, and not all advertised jobs are truly open jobs. And we're going to go through that in detail. But we use, as I mentioned, a program called Jobs EQ to pull this data, but Jobs EQ doesn't analyze the data. We analyze the data. It doesn't do it automatically at the push of a button. And that's why it's really important for a group like the one you see on our screen to come in and do an analysis and peel back the layers of this data. So Leslie, if you'll progress to the next slide, I'll just provide a little bit of an overview, the big picture. Despite COVID-19, there remains a significant number of open jobs, again, advertised jobs in South Central Kentucky for the month of September 2020. The August 2020 unemployment rate is high, but it's still better than the U.S. national average. We have in our region 7,749 advertised, again, not open, but advertised jobs for the month of September in the 10 counties of South Central Kentucky. Of those, 1,879 of those jobs are part-time. To give you some percentage breakdown, that represents about 24% of the total number of jobs advertised. So 24% of the jobs advertised are part-time positions in our 10-county region. Moving ahead, 4,381 of those jobs advertised are below $15 an hour. So that's about 57% of the jobs advertised in our region are below $15 an hour. And when looking at a report like this, again, data sourcing is very, very important. And Jobs EQ is a good program to pull data. It's one of the best we have, but keep in mind, it's still not perfect in data pulling. And that's why it's important for groups like ours to do an in-depth analysis of it. This next box shows that very, very clearly. Approximately 1,162 of the jobs advertised of the 7,749 are jobs that are outside of our region. These are jobs that are advertised by employers that do not reside in our region. These may be jobs, work from home kinds of jobs. These may be jobs in a sector that has a lot of mobility without any kind of headquarters in our region. You may not be reporting to work at, say, a bricks and mortar location in our region, but the jobs are advertised. These jobs may not even be in our region at all. 1,162 of them are outside of our region. So that's a pretty big chunk, 15% in fact. Finally, 63% of the job ads in our region do not indicate any educational requirements. That's not to say that you don't need any education, high school or post-secondary, to fill those jobs. That is just to say that 63% of them do not have education listed in the job advertisement. So again, in a nutshell, we are looking at job advertisements in our region and assuming that those jobs are open jobs. But keep in mind the 4 boxes that we just discussed throughout the presentation. And I will now turn it over to John Swords, our VP of Operations and Special Projects, for a deep dive into this data. John?
Sure. The agenda that we're going to follow, I'll start with an executive overview, and then we're going to look at several different industry sectors or clusters, and then we'll finish up. Can you go forward a slide, Leslie? So let's begin with an executive overview. Just to kind of refresh everybody and kind of go through this, like last month, I'll spend a few minutes on this particular slide. I realize that you may not be able to see all the text or the data on the slide depending on what device you're watching this on. So I'll do my best to call out numbers and point out where to find the information as I talk through it. So as you look at this slide and you look at the top left, it shows our 10-county region. I put that on there just to point out that we're very focused on pulling data from these 10 counties and these 10 counties only. Because that's what our responsibility is as a board, is to focus on the 10 county regions or 10 counties that comprise South Central Kentucky. When you look at those 10 counties, what we see is that there are a total number of 130,500 jobs that's filled and unfilled, total number of jobs in our region. Moving to the top middle, this is just a little breakout of our major industry clusters and the total number of jobs in each cluster. So at the top, you see retail, hospitality, and food as a cluster, 28,000 jobs. Below that, manufacturing with over 26,000 jobs, healthcare, professional services, construction, transportation, and at the bottom, is kind of the sum of all the other industry sectors that we have in our region. If you look to the right of that, there's a pie chart and it just breaks out the percentage of each one of these. And so like if you look at retail, hospitality, food, that's 21.9% there in the green pie on that pie chart. Manufacturing is represented in that kind of reddish orange, and it's showing a percentage of 19.9%. So manufacturing makes up 19.9% of our total the total number of jobs that we have in South Central Kentucky. Moving to the bottom left, I mentioned in the month of September, over a 30-day period, that 30-day period of 1 to 30 September, there were 7,749 jobs advertised in our region. Kind of to the right of that, in those tan boxes, that was the information we covered up front just a minute ago. 57% of those jobs had an average wage at or below $15 an hour. 24% of the jobs were identified as part-time, and approximately 15% of the jobs were actually jobs that you could argue are not in our region technically. We keep them, we identify them. They are jobs for job seekers, certainly in our region, but there's no physical presence of an employer here. So, we'll get into some of that as we go further, but we can kind of debate, are those truly jobs in our region from a job seeker perspective, or are they, which is probably yes, but from a workforce or economic development perspective, I probably wouldn't count them. They're artificially inflating what the total number of open jobs that we've got.
And John, I've got a quick question, or I guess an observation. So looking at the box in the middle center, major industry clusters, this to me is surprising, because if someone had asked me what is the biggest job sector in this region, I would have said without hesitation manufacturing. But looking at the numbers that you have, retail, hospitality, and food, that's actually a bigger number than manufacturing. But going back to what Robert said initially, a lot of those may be part-time. So that to me is extremely insightful, because yes, this is where we have the greatest number, but the majority of those may be part-time. Is that on target?
Yeah, I think so. As a single sector, manufacturing is the largest single sector. But what we've done in this report is we've clustered some sectors. So we've clustered retail, hospitality, and food. We put them together and clustered them because there's a lot of overlap and similarity between those. Where you find hotels, you find restaurants, and you find retail. And there's a lot of similarities and a lot of characteristics that are the same. And we'll get into some of that on that particular slide. But so as a cluster, it's the largest. As a sector, manufacturing, as a single industry sector, manufacturing is the largest. So I think your observation is really good, Leslie. And we'll talk as we get into each one of these industry sectors or clusters. We'll get into some of that detail in subsequent slides.
Mm-hmm. I would add too that the large number of jobs in the cluster of retail, hospitality, and food are most likely contributing to the $15 an hour and below percentage, which is really high at 57%.
Yeah.
That large number, when you look at 28,000 jobs in that cluster, then that's going to really contribute to the $15 an hour or less wage bracket, which shows up 57% of the time in jobs that are advertised in our region. So that's really important to keep in mind too, since that sector is so large, in addition to the fact that many of them probably are also part-time and contributing to our large 24% total number of jobs that are part-time in the region.
Yeah, I think exactly. I think that's exactly right. And it may also, kind of, if we look at the education requirements or the lack of specificity on the education requirements, I bet if we really dove into all the retail, hospitality, food job postings, probably not a lot of education requirements are being listed on those for those jobs, because there's not a high bar to entry to get into fast food or retail or hospitality in many instances. So,
yeah, thank you.
Dr. Boone, you had mentioned previously about 63% of the job ads did not identify an education requirement, and as I mentioned last month, I think one of the things that's an interesting stat. That's a really high percentage of not listing any type of education requirement. And I think that's a conversation that needs to be convened. I think it makes, as I mentioned last month, it makes it difficult for education providers to train people for the skills that are needed when the skills aren't being identified necessarily in a job advertisement. So I mean, I think that's a conversation that needs to be convened at some point to see if we can do better at that as a workforce system.
Absolutely.
Right down the middle, you see median wage for all occupations in South Central Kentucky. What that is if you took every single wage level from the lowest to the highest, and then you put your finger right smack dab in the middle of what all those wages were, to identify a median wage, what you would find out is that in South Central Kentucky, the median wage is $33,600 a year, or $16.60 an hour. So that's median wage for our region. Next to that, to the right, unemployment rates. And there's a point, unemployment rate for South Central Kentucky from August, you can look at what it was in August of 2019 at 4.4% and compare it to August of 2020. It is currently at 6.5%. And then as another point of comparison, you can see how South Central Kentucky compares to the United States in the same over the same time period. This data comes from does not come from JobsEQ. It comes from a website called Statista. I've got the link to that just below there, in very tiny text just below those boxes. And that's where we're pulling that unemployment rate data. Key takeaways for employers, really similar to what we pointed out last month. We have a significant number of open jobs in our region despite COVID, and so that's a sign of good health for our economy, that we're seeing so many jobs being advertised over the last month. Although our unemployment rate is definitely higher than it was this time last year, our unemployment rate is doing better than the U.S. average currently. So that, I think that's although it's high, there's a silver lining to that. And we'll get into this later on. What we see is what we're going to look at in each one of these industries is a three-year snapshot of how wages have progressed. And with one exception, our wages have moved in step with wage growth in Kentucky and wage growth in the United States. That one exception is healthcare. That is locally our healthcare and social assistance wage rates have remained really flat compared to the state and U.S. average. So we'll get into that in a subsequent slide. So Leslie or Dr. Boone, any follow-up questions on that executive overview? If not, we can move forward.
I do want to add, John, that before we even launched our first open jobs report last month, we spent months, first of all, analyzing, collecting the data from JobsEQ. But since we're moving into the sector-based part of this discussion now, I wanted to add that apart from spending months collecting and analyzing the data, we had a very productive meeting with KY Stats, which is the state's statistical branch, and we went through our report with them. It was vetted through them. They had some good feedback for us in the report. And then above and beyond that, we vetted the report with our workforce board, which is made up of industry leaders in the sectors that we are going to be talking about now. And we vetted it not once, but twice with those groups so that we were able to make sure that there's practical application to what we're doing and that there weren't any red flags that popped up to say, oh, well, this number seems wrong from a healthcare perspective, or this number seems wrong from a construction perspective, and so on. So I did want to say that now that we're entering this discussion of our sector-based analysis.
Yeah, Dr. Boone, thank you for that. That's a really good context. And as you mentioned a number of times, we're using primarily JobsEQ as our data source, which we have a lot of confidence in. But always if I'm talking to somebody personally about this, I always caveat these kinds of numbers and statistics can get really messy really fast, and you can get really bogged down in it. And so, as we analyze this over months, I mean, a lot of what we were doing too was trying to, how do we clean this up? How do we make this a usable report for everybody, and simplify it and take some of the messiness of data and statistics out of it. And so, I hope that we've done that with the report we're demonstrating right now. So with that, yeah, we'll get into the really the deep dive portion of this presentation, and we're going to look at a number of different clusters or industry sectors that really kind of dominate South Central Kentucky. So the first one, as we've alluded to, is retail, hospitality, and food. What you would see in really small text under the heading of retail, hospitality, and food is in parentheses is actually what what this cluster is comprised of. And so, if you've got a laptop, you might be able to see this. If you've got a smaller device, probably not. But retail, hospitality, and food service includes wholesale trade, merchant wholesalers, durable, merchant wholesalers, non-durable, wholesale electronics, retail, agriculture, forestry, fishing, hunting, accommodation, arts, entertainment, recreation, food services, and drinking places. So that's a mouthful. It's a lot of different sub-industries that we've grouped together to make up this cluster. And so as we group this, what we found, as mentioned, we have 28,605 filled and unfilled jobs that in this region. As a percentage of total employment, this cluster makes up 21.9% of all jobs in our region. So a little over a fifth of all jobs, retail, hospitality, and food. And then below that, kind of on the left side of the slide at the very bottom, we looked at the 3-year percent change in average annual wages per worker. And what we found is that 3-year percent change was plus 8.9%. And you can see there also how that compares to the Kentucky average and the U.S. average. So the Kentucky average is 8.7% and the U.S. average at 9.9%. So we're slightly better than the state, but slightly below U.S. wage growth over the last 3 years in this particular sector. Moving to the middle, number of jobs advertised between 1 and 30 September. 2,310 jobs advertised in this cluster. To the right of that, who were the top 5 companies posting jobs in this 30-day period? You can see there that Dollar General had the most job advertisements with 64, followed by McDonald's with 61, which was then followed by Aramark, Lowe's, and AutoZone. That list goes on, but those are the top 5 companies that were posting the most ads over the 30-day period. If you look in the center, kind of center bottom, what we have there is a lot of data. So it's what were the top 5 jobs advertised in the last 35 days. So this is really about job occupation. So the job occupation that had the most advertisements was retail salesperson, and there were a total of 482 advertisements for that position. What we've provided there with the retail salesperson is some wage data. So there's local wage data. So in South Central Kentucky, the local average wage for a retail salesperson is $26,300 a year. And as a point of comparison, there's 2. There's one for the state. So if you look at the state average for retail salespersons, it's $26,500, which is just slightly more than the local average. But we also provide a point of comparison with Northern Tennessee averages. So this is let me just kind of just talk about why we're doing this. So, South Central Kentucky, our region sits on the border with Tennessee. And so, we're within 60 miles of the Nashville market here in Bowling Green, but certainly, Franklin and Tompkinsville and the southern end of our region is influenced by what's going on in North Tennessee. There's a lot of we have workers on this side who reside here but work in Tennessee, and you have people that reside in Tennessee and work up here. So there's a lot of transit back and forth, and so to some degree, we are in competition with what's going on in Northern Tennessee. So now that said, we can only pull a limited amount of data out of Northern Tennessee. And so what we have access to are 5 counties in Northern Tennessee. And I've got a little call out kind of on the bottom right of those 5 Northern Tennessee counties. Those counties do not include, Nashville or Davidson County proper. However, what I would say is that some of those counties are bedroom communities in Nashville, and there's certainly, some of the wages we'll see are reflected, by what's going on in Nashville in that market, and some of the wages maybe reflect the more rural nature of these counties. And so, anyway, it's if we compare what's going on here with what's going on in Northern Tennessee, sometimes the wages are, comparable, and sometimes they're not. And so we wanted to provide that to employers as a point of comparison on all these slides, because if you're in a particular sector, say healthcare, you may be feeling the impacts of what's going on in Nashville or in Northern Tennessee more than maybe in the retail or hospitality food sector. So anyway, we provide that level of information on all these slides. So to get back on track, I talked retail salesperson was the #1 job occupation listed. That's followed by first line supervisors of retail salespersons. At number 3 was first line supervisors of food preparation and serving workers. Number 4, fast food and counter workers. And number 5, janitors and cleaners. So you can see the total number of ads in each of these top 5 job occupations. And of course, there's many more ads below that. We're just hitting the top 5 job occupations that were demanded in September. In terms of analysis, again, not a lot of change from what we saw last month. Retail hospitality food is accounting, it's accounting for 30% of all the jobs being advertised in the month of September. So I mean that as Dr. Boone mentioned, when we look at of all those jobs being advertised, how many of them have low wages or wages below $15 an hour? Well, this is the big hitter. This is probably the most influential reason why. It's because a lot of these jobs are coming out of this particular sector. And as we know, retail, hospitality, and food, largely has low wages and low education requirements and low credential requirements. And so when you have that combination, you generally don't have high wages. They're on the lower end. We also found that 708 of the 2,310 jobs advertised were listed as part-time. That's 31%. That's almost a third were identified as part-time. And then I guess the positive here, or not that these are negative, but the positive here is that this cluster has seen really strong wage growth over the last 3 years. And I think that's a function of, there's just such demand. There's so much demand when 30% of all your job advertisements are in the sector. That's telling us that there's a large need for workers. And I think employers have had to increase wages to compete in the marketplace. So I think that's been what's behind this almost 9%, 9% change in wage growth over the last few years. Okay, Leslie or Dr. Boone, any comments?
I think that sums it up really well, John. Thank you.
All right, well, we'll go to the next one, manufacturing. All right, so I'm getting my slide up over here on the side so that I can read what's on the screen myself. So manufacturing, as mentioned, is the single largest industry sector that we have. Over 26,200 jobs in this sector. As a percentage of our total regional employment, it makes up 19.9% of our economy. And that right at a fifth of our economy is in manufacturing. And then you can see solid wage growth at 5.52% over the last 3 years, and that we actually locally we are exceeding the state and U.S. average in wage growth in this particular sector. So that's a good news story. Total number of jobs advertised in September, 389. And similar to last month, what I find interesting about this number is, 389 jobs advertised out of over 7,700. That's only 5% of the total jobs advertised. So when you look at, the way I like to look at this is manufacturing makes up 20% of our economy, but only 5% of the job postings. To me, the read between the lines there is that manufacturing is doing pretty well. I think they're largely getting the workers they need. Certainly, if they didn't, I think there would be a higher volume of jobs advertised for manufacturing. So, looking at which were the top 5 companies posting jobs in the last 30 days. At number 1 was Luttrell Staffing Group at 18. Next was Resource Manufacturing, which is a staffing agency as well, 17 job advertisements. Third was Purdue Farms, which is technically in Cromwell, Kentucky, and technically is not in our region, but it's right on the border. And their job advertisements do kind of they do get scooped up into the number, but you can make the argument that these shouldn't count. But anyway, they're on there. Fourth would be Dart Container, and fifth would be Toyo Automotive Parts.
John, I have a question about this because I think this is really interesting. I am surprised that the top 2 companies for number of job ads are staffing agencies in our region. So that just kind of hits me as surprising to start out at some degree. I expect them to certainly be on the list, but not among the top 1 or 2 positions like they are on the list for jobs advertised in the past 30 days. Can you kind of walk us through how you got these numbers of job ads? How were you able to hone in on the fact that Resource Manufacturing, for example, had 17 job advertisements in our region?
Yeah, sure. So when I use Jobs EQ, which is labor market data tool, it has a function in there called real-time intelligence, and you go into real-time intelligence, and it's the part of Jobs EQ that scrapes from all the different internet advertised jobs. It attempts to, once it scrapes everything, from Indeed and Monster and Career Builder and the others, it then tries to get rid of redundancies, and it does a pretty good job of it, but not a perfect job of it. But so yeah, I'm just going with what it's spitting out, and what it's spitting out is that Luttrell Staffing Group ran 18 job advertisements in the month, in that 30-day period, and I can go in there, I can get it to kind of pull out onto a spreadsheet, and it's got hyperlinks to the actual you can hyperlink into every single one of these 18 jobs and see what was posted. Okay. And often that link will then take you to Monster or Career Builder or Snag a Job or whatever Luttrell Staffing Group or any of these employers are using, because they all use different internet job advertising sites, but it'll take you to whoever they use in particular, and you can see it.
Okay. And yeah, thank you.
John, I've got a question that sort of plays off what Dr. Boone just asked. As far as manufacturing, with the top 2 advertisers being staffing agencies, for someone who is unfamiliar with workforce, why are staffing agencies the top two advertisers for manufacturing?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a stab at that. I think that staffing agencies have become a very common practice, particularly among employers. It's a way for employers to try before they buy, but it's also a way for job seekers to try before they buy. I was speaking with a manufacturer last week, and in this particular manufacturing setting, there's certain chemicals they use in the process that emit certain smells, and it's not. Some people get into that setting and they just can't, they can't do it. I mean, it might be a smell, it might be what's in the air, it might be a number of reasons. So, on a job seeker side, it's maybe it's going to work out, maybe it's not, for whatever reason. So, I mean, they can kind of go in, see if it works. If it doesn't, then, they can opt out of it or, do something else. I think from an employer perspective too, I mean, it costs a lot of money to bring somebody on board full time. The recruiting cost, the onboarding cost, that's immense. And then to have somebody walk away 5 days later because they didn't like the shift, they didn't like the supervisor, they didn't like, there was a sight or a smell or sound that disagreed with them. That's a huge financial burden to the employer. So staffing agencies, I think in a lot of ways allows, it allows the employers to get people in the door to do work, but if they're not going to stick around, that's for the staffing agency to deal with, not for the employer. Does that? And I'm sure there are employers or staffing agencies out there that could probably provide a much more thorough explanation of why they're so prominent.
I think that's a pretty good assessment from our conversations with employers. I think that's a pretty good assessment as to why many employers, particularly in the manufacturing sector, utilize staffing agencies.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to at least address that because it does stand out as being different. So thank you. No, that helps tremendously.
All right, sure. Okay, so let me see where I think I was going to get into the top 5 advertised jobs over the last 30 days, which is bottom middle again. You can see that there were 114 job advertisements for first line supervisors of production workers. At number 2 were production workers. Number 3, inspectors, testers, sorters, samplers, and weighers. At number 4, molding, core making, and casting machine setters, operators, and number 5, bakers. And again, we provide local wage data, what the wage rate averages are in Kentucky and what the wage rate averages are in Northern Tennessee. In terms of analysis, as I've mentioned, this is the single largest sector in our region. And, when we're sitting at 19.9% as a percentage of our economy, the U.S. average is 8.2. So we're exceeding the U.S. average in terms of manufacturing by 11%. So, as I mentioned, last month with all this manufacturing, I mean, I think there's a strong need for youth and adults that have mechanical skills and aptitude, math or STEM skills aptitude, because that kind of goes hand in hand. Modern manufacturing, that goes hand in hand. I mean, that's a needed skill in modern manufacturing. And then, I mean, I think it goes without saying, when 20% of your economy is tied up in one industry sector, that makes your local economy vulnerable to, the ups and downs of in this case, manufacturing. So if there's a slowdown in manufacturing, it's going to pull down and slow down our local economy just because of the weight that it carries in our region. All right, any comments or questions on manufacturing? All right, Leslie, we'll go forward. Next, we have healthcare and social assistance cluster. Again, this makes up 16,496 jobs in our region. That's filled and unfilled. That's as a percentage of our regional employment, that's 12.5%, or 1/8 of our economy. You can see that at 12.5%, healthcare and social assistance slightly lag the Kentucky and U.S. average as a percentage. And as was mentioned on the executive overview slide, the most surprising thing that I found when looking at this was the 3-year percent change in average annual wage growth per worker was 1.1%. And that really lags the state average of 5.1% and the U.S. average of 7.3%. We had some discussion around this in this forum last time, Leslie, about why that might be. And I don't have a great answer on that. I don't. That's a pretty significant gap in why our rate has remained flat. And I just don't know. I even hate to speculate on why that might be, but I certainly think that it might be worth convening a conversation with some of our healthcare executives and stakeholders to see what might be going on there. The positive here though is that we were not, as a board, we were not really tracking that. We couldn't have this level of conversation before we started doing this type of analysis and putting together this report. So that's the positive, is we can now take a deeper dive into that and maybe figure out what's going on. Getting into the number of jobs advertised over the last 30 days, there were 1,175. You can see there who the top 5 companies posting jobs were. Home Instead Senior Care, HCA, Commonwealth Health Corporation. At number 4, Logan Memorial Hospital. At number 5, Genesis Healthcare. Below that, what were the top 5 advertised jobs in the last 30 days? So registered nurses, number 1, 318. There's an asterisk there. And like last month, this is worth explaining a little bit. When we look at that 318 advertised jobs for RNs, as we dove into that and peeled it back. And what I found was that out of that 318, 53 of those jobs posted were for traveling nurse positions. And so, and as you read those, these are companies that need traveling nurses, not for jobs here, but for jobs elsewhere. They're just looking for nurses in our region. So 17% of those RN jobs were for jobs that aren't even here. So, of course, we leave that 318 in there, but the real number is probably 318 minus 53. So anyway, it's a point of discussion. We leave it in there, but RNs are certainly not the only job occupation where we see jobs being posted within our region that are for work outside of our region. So it's just worth noting. Below RNs, you have personal care aides, 124 job advertisements, nursing assistants, at number 4, LPNs, and at number 5, speech pathologists. And of course, again, we have wage data there for each one of those occupations. As a percentage of all the jobs advertised, healthcare and social assistance, this cluster made up 15% of all jobs advertised. And so, kind of like I did previously, it makes up 12.5%, this cluster makes up 12.5% of our economy and accounted for 15% of the jobs. That's pretty close. That's almost a 1-for-1 comparison there. I talked about the really flat wage growth over the last 3 years. I've talked about, the fourth bullet there of the traveling nurse positions, or the third bullet, and then the fourth bullet. So, I mean, largely what we see when we look at all the jobs being posted, when you add them all up, a large percentage of them are for entry-level work into healthcare and social assistance. And so, as a board, we recognize there's really a strong need to create, get folks over the hump and into those entry-level positions and onto a pathway to where they can elevate. So, the more folks that we can get into, as medical assistants, CNAs, phlebotomists, once they get their foot in the door, that should create the pathway to become an LPN or ultimately an RN. So I'll stop there for any questions that either of you may have. Okay. Leslie, no questions or comments. We'll move forward. All right, professional services. Yeah. So again, what I'll do here is let me start with defining what professional services is, because that's kind of a nebulous title. So this cluster is comprised of jobs, occupations in telecommunications, data processing, rental and leasing services, professional, scientific, and technical services, management of companies, administrative and support services. So it's a really kind of broad range of professions that comprise this cluster. Total number of jobs in the region, 12,331, and that's filled and unfilled jobs. It makes up 9.4% of our economy. And in terms of 3-year percent change in average annual wage growth, 11.1%, really, really strong wage growth over the last 3 years. Exceeds Kentucky average by almost 3% and exceeds the U.S. average by 1%. So that's a good news story in the professional services cluster. Jobs advertised over the last 30 days, 1,262. Who's been doing the job postings? You can see there at number 1, Western Kentucky University, followed by Home Job Staffing. Home Job Staffing was on last month, and I'll just to kind of remind everybody that this is one of those I kind of question what this company is doing. What this, are these truly jobs? When you look at this, what are they looking for? They're looking for people to stay at home and send out marketing or survey work. So it's not exactly the old stuffing envelope kind of job posting, but I don't know how legitimate these jobs are, and I'm fairly confident these jobs, although they could be for job seekers in our region, I'm fairly confident this company is not in our region. But they posted 48 job advertisements over the last month, so they're on. At number 3 is Intuit. At number 4 is Staffigo Technical Services. This is an IT search firm, and what they're looking for are folks with IT certifications that can work remotely from from the comfort of our home in our region. So again, jobs for our folks, sure. Is the company here, or the jobs, is our physical presence of any of the companies here? Hard to say, doubtful though. And the number 5, J.P. Morgan and Chase had the 5th most job advertisements last month. Top 5 jobs advertised last 30 days. At number 1, customer service representative at 173, followed by food service manager, software developers, number 4, medical and health service managers, and number 5, accountants and auditors. This came up last month. So you might be looking at this going to say, hey, wait a minute, why food service, why medical? Shouldn't those be in other industry clusters? But when you look at the definition of professional services, It's, one of the groups is management, and management can cross all industry sectors. So if it's a management type position, it's going to pull them into this cluster as opposed to leaving them where, whatever cluster they may have originated from, healthcare, construction, what have you. So if it's a management position, it pulls into this cluster. And you can see a couple of examples here of where that's happened.
John, I don't have the other figures in front of me, but this appears to be one of the higher paying sectors. Is that correct?
It is. I mean, it's professional services. So when you look at, telecommunications, data processing, IT, scientific and technical services, and that includes things like architects. What you can largely say about the occupations in this cluster are they require secondary degrees largely. They're white collar, for the most part. They're white collar, kind of higher end jobs. So yes, the wages, on average, the wages are much higher in this cluster than in other clusters.
John, have we done an analysis on this cluster in particular as far as number of jobs advertised specifying educational requirements? I know, at the outset of the presentation, many of our jobs in the region do not specify educational requirements, but I would imagine that that's not the case kind of blanket all sectors. Some sectors, for example, may specify educational requirements more than others, and I would assume that this would be one that would specify educational requirements. Do you know if that's the case, or maybe something we could look into in a future episode?
Sure, I think that's a safe assumption, but I've not specifically ran that, looked at it, ran that level of granular detail on this particular cluster, but we can, and I think that's worth commenting on in a follow-on open jobs report segment.
Yeah,
but I do think that's a safe assumption. I mean, again, a lot of these professions do require a combination of advanced degrees and experience. So,
And I would think
reflects the wages.
I would think too that this sector, given the pandemic we're currently in, this sector, at least in my opinion, will keep growing at a faster pace, just based on the remote work and so on.
Yeah, I mean that kind of gets to that second bullet there in the analysis. Yeah, a lot of these jobs are suited for remote work and are. I don't want to say they're COVID proof, but certainly, there's a lot more potential to keep on working. And if you're in this sector, there's a lot more potential to keep your job and keep on working, just because of the ability to work remotely.
And John, I have a comment that's sort of inspired by this sector, professional services, but it would also fall in line with several sectors, including manufacturing and healthcare. And it goes back to our discussion earlier about the difference between an advertised job and an open job. And in keeping in mind that Jobs EQ is going through the web, sites like Monster, Career Builder, and it's finding open jobs that are advertised there and then outputting numbers. Well, that all presupposes that the jobs are advertised on those platforms. So in this sector, like with attorneys, with high-level executives, managers, and in the healthcare sector with physicians, other specialties, physical therapists, high-level managers in healthcare, and in the manufacturing sector with engineers, other high-level managers, those types of positions historically aren't posted on Monster, Career Builder, sites like that. Those are positions where a search firm is involved, where a hospital CEO, for example, is doing the recruiting, or a high-level HR person is doing the recruiting on behalf of the employer. So those jobs aren't making it onto Monster and Career Builder and those kinds of sites. So I think it's important for the audience to get that, because what that will do is, to some degree, that'll artificially deflate the average wages in our region, because we don't have those extreme values in our data set of high-level managers, physicians. Granted that there aren't those aren't high demand areas in our region the way we think of them, but still there is a demand. But those jobs are being if they're being advertised at all, they're not being advertised on the kind of platforms that Jobs EQ is pulling from. They're being advertised in journals. They're being advertised through search firm websites. Headhunters are going out and trying to actively cultivate candidates and that sort of thing. So I did want to mention that in regards to this category in particular, professional services, but also in regards to manufacturing and healthcare as well.
Yeah, that's a good, astute observation, and really a good segue to what should be next, I believe, is construction. So on that note, I'll just kind of jump straight to it. If you look at the analysis, the first bullet on the analysis on construction is construction job postings only accounted for 1.7% of all jobs advertised in our region. And that is a really, really low percentage, because as we all know, you only have to drive around a little bit to see how much construction is going on here. And so, I'll just kind of talk analysis and then we'll get into the numbers. But what we've found as we've kind of peeled this back is that there's a high percentage of folks self-employed in the construction industry. A lot of those self-employed folks in construction, they're probably going to have a small crew that works for them. But what it appears that they're not doing is they're not going on to Monster or Career Builder or Indeed, or they're not posting their jobs online, because that's expensive. It's especially expensive when you're self-employed and you got a super small payroll, and they're just, I don't think they're doing it. And so I think
it may not be the best way for them to find candidates. I mean, historically, construction workers may not be going to Monster, Career Builder, Indeed and finding work.
Yeah, I think so some of this industry is above, a lot of it's above board, but some of it's below board, so there's, let's say you need a couple extra hands. You might be able to drive down to Home Depot and pick up a couple of day workers and pay those guys cash to carry shingles up and down a ladder on a roof. That does happen. That's how somebody might be spending their money rather than trying to post an ad on the internet. And so to your point, Dr. Boone, do we have a lot of confidence in JobsEQ? Yeah, it's given us good data, but it's not perfect data. There's holes in it, right? There's holes on the high end with some, upper level executive type positions. And I think there's clearly holes in construction where, it's not really being utilized to advertise construction jobs. So, all right, to get us back on track, there 7,180 total construction jobs filled and unfilled in the region, makes up 5.4% of our economy. You can see there that wage growth locally was kind of in lockstep with the state and slightly below U.S. average. As mentioned, 128 jobs advertised out of the 7,749, 1.7%. So again, really low number. Who was doing the job posting? You can see Scotty's contracting with 7 job advertisements in September. Charles DeWeese Construction with 6 job ads in September. Then the next 3 are actually staffing companies: Trillium Staffing, Express Employment Professionals, and Maddox Group. Top 5 advertised jobs in in September. At number one, construction laborers, 41 job advertisements, followed by plumbers, pipe fitters, steam fitters. At number three, operating engineers and other construction equipment operators. Number four, carpenters. Number five, electricians. So I began with analysis, so I won't really hit that again. But I will say that, what I alluded to, construction is, at least residential construction in this area, is really just not missed a beat since COVID happened. I mean, it remains vibrant and strong. Haven't really seen any slowdowns in that. In discussion with the city of Bowling Green, at least, because it's what I had data I had access to, there has been a slight dip in the number of commercial construction permits issued. So that is, commercial construction is slightly down per the city of Bowling Green, but residential construction remains strong. All right, any other comments or questions? All right, Leslie, if you could go forward one more. And I believe this is our last industry sector to look at. So transportation, distribution, and logistics, 4,248 filled and unfilled jobs in our region, makes up 3.2% of our local economy, which before starting this, kind of getting into these numbers and doing this analysis, that to me seems low. My assumption beforehand was, with all the manufacturing we had, there would be a correlation with the number of transportation companies needed to move manufacturing goods, but no, we have 3.2% of our economy is made up of transportation, distribution, and logistics companies. So that is lower than the state national average by a bit. You can see that in terms of wage growth over the last 3 years, it's, this sector has been pretty much locally, our percentage is again in lockstep with what we're seeing in the state and the U.S. So again, total number of jobs advertised over the 30-day period, 1,348. That accounted for 17% of all jobs advertised. So I'll kind of do this comparison again. When you look at, on one hand, 3.2% of our economy, but 17% of all jobs advertised. I mean, there's a huge need seemingly for transportation, distribution, and logistic jobs in our region. So who's been doing the advertising? So number one, Brown Trucking Company. At number two, Total Transport of Mississippi. They were on the list last month. Total Transport of Mississippi is actually out of Richland, Mississippi. They have no physical presence here, and yet they ran 40 job advertisements across our region. At number three, Volume Transport, headquartered in Conyers, Georgia. Again, need to fill jobs, but they're not physically here. They ran 32 job advertisements in the month of September. Number four, Tractor Supply. Number five, Anderson Trucking Services out of Minnesota. So kind of dropping down, top five jobs advertised in September. At number one, by and far, the most, heavy and tractor trailer truck driver at 651 job advertisements. Like RN before, there's an asterisk. And so, I'll have you look over to the analysis piece of it on the third bullet. So out of the 651 jobs advertised, 443 of those were advertised by companies like Total Transport of Mississippi or Volume Transport. There are companies that need truck drivers, but they have no physical presence here. They don't have any type of brick and mortar location. They don't have a place where they drop a load, pick a load up. But as far as I can tell, they're not here. I mean, so So 68% of the 651 jobs are actually out of our region. They're not here. Could a job seeker in our region take one of those 650 jobs? 51 jobs? Absolutely, they could. But from again, if you put our workforce board or an economic development hat on, really those jobs, there's 443 jobs that really are being advertised here that aren't really here. And so to me, that's, that artificially increases the total number of open jobs that we've got.
So just to clarify, because I believe I understand everything you're saying, but just to clarify, so you have, I believe you said 443 jobs advertised that are technically outside of our region. But because those employers are advertising within our region saying, hey, here's a great job in Minnesota, or here's a great job wherever, those are being counted in Jobs EQ because the advertisement is running in our region.
Yeah. So the way that internet job postings work is, they're running them in a zip code, right? And so if you look at Total Transport of Mississippi, they're hitting a couple dozen zip codes in our region, and it's not just Bowling Green or Glasgow. They're hitting little crossroad towns in our region. Canmer, 88, Summershade, so really small community, but those communities have a zip code and they're running an advertisement there. So that's one. Two, and this is specific to, trucking companies, at least over the road trucking. They don't really care where you live. So they're not running a job advertisement saying, come work in Minnesota. They just need you to get behind the wheel of a truck and help deliver goods.
They know you're close to an interstate, and they know you can hop on the interstate and be. Yeah. I think they do care to some degree. They don't. So they care where you live strategically, where their loads are going. So they're probably trying to recruit from the northern part of the country along an interstate, so that you can go south and get there within a certain number of hours. So they care to that degree, but they don't care, to John's point, really where you live. You can live. And because you're going to be long haul trucker, you can, it really matters the proximity to an interstate and to where the loads are going.
Okay.
Some trucking companies have multiple nodes where they just drive and they drop a load off and they pick up another trailer and they come back and then some just have you traveling, you're going to be on the road 7 to 10 days driving all across the country, wherever they send you. And then at some point you'll get a break and be able to go home. And they'll try to make sure that your last load drop off is as close to home as they can get you. So, and so I think that's the nature of over the road trucking. So, hopefully we've answered your question. Hopefully, we've characterized it correctly for the trucking industry.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense. It's a little bit different in trucking too, but there are jobs, Leslie, to your point, that may be recruiting talent from our area to somewhere else, like to physically move. There's nothing, stopping a company from posting a job to relocate someone. It's just that's not really prevalent in the TDL sector. But there are jobs, I know, not many, but there are some jobs that are actively recruiting people from our region to live somewhere else and work somewhere else.
And hypothetically, those would still be included in this report because they're advertised within our region.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, as Dr. Boone mentioned, we've been looking at these numbers for a long time, and we've gone back and forth. Should we strip them out or should we keep them? And so ultimately what we decided for this report is let's keep them, but let's tag them. Let's put an asterisk there and provide this. What we're doing exactly right now, providing context on the numbers you're seeing.
That's right.
And so that's what we're doing. We're tagging them and saying, hey, look, we see that we see that big number of 651, but we also understand that that 68% of those are actually, it's off by 68%, because 68% of those they're not here. So at the beginning of this presentation, when we talked about over 1,100 out-of-sector jobs, well, 443 of them are for this one occupation. Out of the hundreds of occupations, this one is contributing, the most to that 1,100 number. So, good conversation.
Yeah, very good.
All right, I think I think I've finished talking about this slide. So, all right. So just, to summarize, we've hit some of these topics multiple times now, but, so in summary, our local economy, it does remain strong. Obviously, you wouldn't have over 7,700 job advertisements if companies weren't hiring. So that is a good, strong indicator. Obviously, there's a high percentage of those jobs that are on kind of the lower end of the wage spectrum, lower end of the skill spectrum. We've very thoroughly hit how many of the jobs were part-time, how many of them were below $15 an hour, and how many of them were out of sector. I think we've sufficiently talked about retail, hospitality, and food as a cluster, making up 30% of all the jobs advertised over the last 30 days. It's a huge percentage. And I think we've sufficiently discussed just the regional wage growth is across all the sectors has been really good, with one exception. So I think that hits kind of the wave top. I'm summarizing the wave tops of hitting the wave tops of everything we've talked about today. So I guess I would conclude with this comment, is that if you're watching this and you have a particular data query or need, that's what we're here to do. We're here to deep dive in and provide the best information we can to employers, to job seekers, to educators, to we're local politicians. We're here to provide that labor market data and support whatever your request is. So that's my shot.
No, I would just echo that, and I would say that our goal is not to just release a report and then have it up for interpretation or not interpretation. Our goal is to provide context for the numbers in our report, to do a deep dive, and sometimes that is best carried out through a discussion. So you can always reach out to us and we can have a discussion about it. But it's our hope that these hour-plus videos really enable us to have some good context for the numbers. Again, just not throwing numbers out there, but really analyzing those numbers and having a conversation about those numbers, in hopes that we inspire conversation above and beyond these videos.
And that's one of the things that I like most about doing this in the virtual video format, because if we release just this paper information, honestly, it can be overwhelming, and it's hard to pull. Okay, what are the things that I need to take away from this? And so, in having this conversation, it's incredibly insightful for me, because I know my big takeaways, and I think that viewers hopefully will have that same experience, because you're walking through the data, but you're also having a conversation about that data. And I think those two things together are extremely powerful.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. This data requires a lot of context. And again, as I mentioned before, it can be messy and squishy, and it's worth taking this hour to get into the context of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all for watching, and look forward to hearing any comments or feedback or questions you have. And we look forward to continuing this every month, this deep dive, and also look forward to seeing how things change as we kind of get into recovery mode post-pandemic.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you.